everyone, Ripley Sellers with Bob's Watches. I'm here with Justin in the studio for episode 10 of Vintage of the Week, where we pull aside one remarkable vintage timepiece and share with you just why we love it. So, Justin, got a really cool one today here, awesome vintage Rolex, but before we get into it, a quick wrist check. What do you have on today?
So I went with, very appropriately, the Milgauss. Today, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about a vintage Milgauss, and you know I love Milgauss. This is one of my favorite Rolex watches. The watch I'm actually wearing, which is the the current modern white dial variant, was my favorite Rolex for a long time. Recently, kind of dethroned, but again, one of my favorite Rolexes.
Yeah, I was really sad to see that one get discontinued.
Yeah.
I'm also in theme because I got the memo. We were talking about a Milgauss. Also wearing a Milgauss, but one of the current production ones, the GV variant. So I've got the Z Blue dial,
yes,
green sapphire crystal, and I think among the modern variety, this might be my favorite modern Milgauss, although the white is close.
That one's hot. I mean, everyone loves that Z Blue dial. I mean, there's good reason, right? That thing's gorgeous, and then with the green sapphire, that's kind of unique to that's one thing I go back and forth. I like the cleanness, but I do love that green sapphire. So, I mean, I guess you can't have everything, but gorgeous watch.
Yeah, and I mean, both of these couldn't be more different than the one we have in front of us right here.
Absolutely.
So what we have referenced 1019 Milgauss.
Yes.
So this is the second, technically third iteration of the Milgauss. Milgauss formally came out 1956 as an anti-magnetic watch for scientists. 6541 was the original reference number. There is a 6543 kind of prototype that was produced before it made its formal debut. Rumor has it those were tested by the scientists at CERN and all of that. But then by 1960, we have the second generation of the Milgauss, the 1019, and this is the one that they produced all the way up until 1988 when they discontinued it, and then we didn't have a Milgauss until that one came out.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of been, it's a little bit of a sleeper to me. It's a little bit off the radar. Maybe that is part of the reason, right? It's not something like the GMT or Submariner, one of these that's been pretty consistent throughout time. The Milgauss is, it's a little spottier.
Yeah, probably the least hype or the most underrated Rolex professional watch. And when you say professional watch, it's a tool watch, sports watch, etc. And I think probably the reason for that is it's not a sports watch, it's a tool watch.
Yes.
It's easy to get excited about race car drivers or scuba divers or mountaineering explorers, whatever, but scientists working in a lab, it doesn't have that same sex appeal there. And then on top of that, you can see the chronograph on a Daytona, you can see the bezel on a Sub. The Milgauss's greatest feature is entirely inside that anti-magnetic shield.
Yes, it's not a button you can push or something that you can see. It does serve its purpose, but like you said, it's a little less sexy. It's a little less, interesting, I guess, than some of the other sport watches. But I think that it deserves a place. Like I said, personally, I love the Milgauss. Aside from the complications of it, where it has that anti-magnetic, that for me personally, that's not something that I'm grappling with on a day-to-day basis, but I love the styling of it, I love the history, and I think it's a great vintage watch.
And especially the black dial one, it's such a sleeper, so they made it in kind of two dial variants. You got the black and the silver.
Right.
You would see a lot more of the silver than the black dial. The black, the matte black with the red accents, the red seconds hand, and again, this seconds hand isn't the lightning bolt that you'll find on our watches, or even the first generation, so it has one of the most restrained, sober appearances of any Milgauss. And this one, it's not a dress watch, but at the same time, it's doesn't have any pushers or bezels or anything like that. It's a really, really clean design, but just the nature of the dial and the color choice, it lends itself towards a much more tool-like experience.
It does, and I like that, and I like the fact that it's, like you said, it's not a dress watch, but it's kind of dressy, and it's not a sport watch, but it's a little bit sporty. It's a tool watch, like you said, right? I mean, it was purpose-built for, a specific job, a specific task. But I like that it can kind of, fill a couple different roles. And I really like the fact that it's styled a little bit different, right? So it doesn't have the lightning bolt hand, which I love. I think the lightning bolt hand is fun. I think it's super cool. It's, it's a win for me. And this one doesn't have that, but it has that bright red tip on that seconds hand that stands out against that matte black dial, and that kind of pairs with like the red Milgauss across. So it's like a little nod to it, right? It's I'd say a precursor if the Lightning wasn't the lightning bolt wasn't first, but you can tell that it's not straying too far away. And another thing I really like is the hands. Those shape of hands, I think, are really interesting.
Yeah, it's not the standard batons.
Yes.
It really does lend itself more towards a heightened legibility. And this is, in my opinion, the most watch nerd Milgauss. Like if you see another, first of all, the Milgauss itself is pretty much an enthusiast collection.
Sure.
You don't see a lot of people who just buy one because they like the history or like the color. It's kind of a couple, it's not often someone's only or first Rolex.
Right.
But even among those, this one's really unique. So the first one you get a lightning bolt seconds hand. Since the arrival of yours on mine, bright orange lightning bolt seconds hand.
Right.
This doesn't have it. So it's kind of got the most subdued, least colorful, least unique appearance.
Yeah.
And so if you see someone, I could see someone buying the watch I'm wearing right now because they just love the bright pop of color, love the dial, think it's beautiful, want to wear it, couldn't care less about its capabilities or history.
Yeah.
It's way more expensive than a standard black dial OP, but at the same time, what you're getting is a really unique piece from a Rolex's history, a pretty rare watch. You really don't see them all that common, and its greatest feature is hidden inside its case. So this isn't the watch you buy just because you think it was cooler on a whim. It's an enthusiast choice, and if you see someone wearing it, it really speaks to that.
It's absolutely an enthusiast watch, and I love that. And we talk about uniqueness of this watch. Let's talk about the size. This is a 38mm case, right?
Yeah, one of the only Rolex watches ever it's such a common size in watch landscape.
In general,
yeah, but it's sort of weird that you get plenty of 36s, get some 37s, get 39s, and it's just that kind of missing
the
38. But here you go.
And I think the 38 is a great size. I tend to like larger watches. I have a very average size wrist, so I just tend to like a little bit. 40 is kind of a good sweet spot for me, but I can wear a 36. And 38 is kind of, it's like right in the middle. It's not too small if you like bigger watches. It's not too big if you like smaller watches. I know you usually err on like the smaller side. You kind of prefer a smaller watch if given the choice. And I think it fits right in there, right? I mean, it's definitely not too big. Like, this is much bigger, right?
Yeah, I was about to
wears a lot
say,
bigger.
like, let me just drop this down and compare it here. It's, I feel because it does have that anti-magnetic shield, these watches are thicker than just say like a Oyster Perpetual. It's kind of a thick watch.
Right.
But then when you put these two side by side, the new one is bigger at 40 mil, but that 2 millimeters of difference, the older one's quite a bit more wearable on my wrist personally. But I think one of the coolest things about it is just that outside of its case diameter, it's sort of the point when the Milgauss transformed from the brand's original vision for the watch, which looked largely like a sub, into what we have now here today. Granted, they did make a smooth bezel version of the 6541, but at that point, it was sort of an in-between stage. At this point, they start dialing it back, giving it a more traditional case. And I think 38 mil, it was a kind of a great size, especially now, because the biggest Oyster Perpetual they had at the time was 36. So this was larger, it was a bit more utilitarian, certainly a bit thicker, alludes to its anti-magnetic properties, bright splash of red on the dial. But at the same time, it's classy enough you could easily wear it with your lab coat and Dockers and a button-up shirt or whatever.
I think it's very versatile. Yeah. We talked about it being a sleeper. I think these are great watches. I personally like them, but just objectively, I don't think they get enough attention. Everyone loves the Daytonas. Everyone loves the Submariners, the GMTs, right? I mean, these 1675s and all the rightfully classic, amazing watches kind of steal the spotlight. I mean, you don't see that many of these. They're kind of rare. They weren't made that many.
They're pretty rare, despite the fact it was made for like 28 years. It wasn't a hot seller for them during that time. I mean, the Milgauss has never been just the big flagship one for them. But yeah, especially this one. They produced it for such a long time that by the time they rolled out the subsequent edition, we're talking sapphire crystals, we're talking of solid link bracelets, we're talking a very, very different watch.
Upgraded.
Yeah, so this is, with the exception of the original Milgauss, which is, deep 5-6 figure pieces, if you can find one. This is the only quote unquote vintage Milgauss, because it's the only one you're going to get with an acrylic crystal up until, again, at this point, without paying 6 figures for a 6541.
And let's talk about this watch specifically, because with all the watches that we feature on the show, this one is for sale, right? You can go to our website as of when this video goes live. If you're looking to pick up a vintage Milgauss, check it out and possibly add it to your collection. So if you want to take that back, the condition is really nice on this one, right? Like, you look at the bracelet, there's just a little bit of stretch. The case is really sharp. The dial looks great. I mean, This is, it's a really nicely preserved vintage piece.
Yeah, really clean. You know, with vintage pieces, sometimes you can either lean into the patina or lean into the cleanness of it. And you know, there's the museum examples and then the ones that look like they've been through a blender, and that's part of their charm.
Sure.
This is really much more of the cleaner variety,
Yes.
which I think works better for the Milgauss. I think like an old beat up sub or GMT looks great with all the scratches.
Right.
But this, I'd be a bit sad to see that awesome dial messed up or stained or just, you know, withered away. I love the way the patina on the lume kind of contrasts against it, kind of warms it up a bit instead of just white, sharp contrast. I mean, it's a great watch, and for someone who already owns the usual suspects from Rolex and is into vintage, you know, maybe they have a sub or two, maybe they have a GMT, an old Daytona. How do you get something, at this point they obviously like sports watches or professional watches, but what do you get that's uniquely different, very, very different, but still very much checks all the same boxes that speak to you as far as Rolex's purpose-built tool watch history?
Right. That's it. And that's exactly where it lands on my radar. If you're looking for a vintage watch and, you know, as great as 1675 GMTs are and, the, you know, all the Submariners and Daytonas and, you know, all the headliners, if you're looking for something a little different that, you know, isn't so expected, isn't something that everyone else has, this is the one to go for.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I think it's, you know, for those who feel like vintage is a little bit, maybe might be too small, it's 38 mil, so it's bigger than your standard Datejust.
Yes.
And then the presence of it, I'm going to just show the thickness right here. It's a little bit thicker than your average watch, so it does, you know, yes, it's 2 millimeters larger, but the wrist presence that it provides is actually a bit more than that when it's all said and done.
Right. Yeah.
Fantastic piece.
Great watch.
Love it. I honestly probably prefer it to the current production one right here. But just because of how unique it is relative to, you know, Rolex's history.
Yeah, I couldn't choose. Don't make me. I'm not going to choose. I'm going to pick both if you twist my arm.
Well, I think that's kind of probably the coolest part about this. Even if you only collected Milgauss, and granted there's not that many Milgauss references, this one almost mandates a spot.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you want the original, sure, quite expensive acquisition and it's very unique. But then these watches, our two watches here, colors notwithstanding, they're more similar than they are, you know,
absolutely.
alike.
Yeah.
And then this, totally different, really great.
Yes.
You don't see them come up for sale all that often, and relative to how seldom you see them, they're quite affordable.
Yeah.
They're not cheap by any means, but they're quite affordable when you look at, this one's from 1979, but like a 1979 sports watch from Rolex.
Yeah, you could spend a lot more.
Oh, you could spend quite a lot more.
Absolutely.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Vintage of the Week. Obviously, you know, we're major fans of this reference 1019 Milgauss with the black dial, but we want to hear yours. And of course, if you like this one, go ahead and head over to the site and pick it up, because it's like all vintage watches. There's one, it's one, and once it's sold, it's gone.
That's it.
But until next time, don't forget to tune in next week for our next episode and see what we'll have in store for you then.